All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Wednesday, April 9th instance of SIG Docs. These meetings are recorded, so if you don't want your visual representation online, feel free to go off camera or hop off. With that being said, I haven't looked, but I don't believe we have agenda items for today. Actually double check that. Yeah, no agenda items for today, but we can take items as they come and build off those. Is there anyone who would like to take notes for this meeting?
Happy to.
Okay, thanks, Eric. And we'll be pushing those notes up to the meetings repo under the Bytecode Alliance if anyone watches this and wants to read those after the fact too. Okay, with that being said, I know Danny, you were at some of the conferences, so from any of those, did any topics come up with regards to documentation around the bytecode, around the component ecosystem and beyond?
Um, I think the main person I talked to was Mikhail about some things. I know he's recently gone through some of the Rust docs and had some inconsistencies that he found, but then also just I think some general feedback about how to make it easier to follow. I don't know if you not to put you on the spot,
Yeah.
Mikhail, but
No, hi guys. Yeah, I'm showing up here on Danny's insistence. I think I've gone through the docs. I started sort of going through the component docs back in October. Um, and I was personally sort of a little confused. I was a little thrown off, and I looked at some of the documentation itself. Noticed like, oh no, Danny, you wrote some of this, but even though I was complaining to you about some of the inconsistencies, but regardless, I put up a PR. I think before I went to Wasamayo, Victor actually had some good feedback on it, which I've yet to address. I think we've had a bit of back and forth. Like one of my thoughts was that I think the more hands-on sort of examples there are, I think the docs would be better for it. That's one of the I'm comfortable with Rust, I'm comfortable with Go, and I sort of went through some of the tutorials. But I think especially on the Rust side, in some of the sections, just if to navigate the tutorial itself, I think it would just be helpful to have more examples and sort of to have zero assumptions about a reader's sort of knowledge level of WebAssembly as a whole. But yeah,
Do you mind sharing some examples and tutorials that you think would be useful?
totally. So I like I said, some of it is in the pull request, and I think I'm glad Victor had some pushback about some of the changes I made. Sometimes I'm a bit proactive about assuming things are a certain way or not, just to format discussion. But I think a great one is sort of the calculator one. So one of the things I did in my PR, I think it's just for consistency's sake, right? I think the component docs themselves have a lot of languages to sort of orthogonalize around at the same time. And like one of the things though that was a good example is the calculator example. So the calculator example, in fact, used a wit signature that I think took in a string for the calculator, whereas like if you would find the files themselves, right, and maybe it's shifted over the months, but like for now, for example, the calculator with argument, I think the adder one, I think takes like two signed integers, right? I think there was a PR recently that sort of like normalized them from signed to unsigned, but the tutorial itself, right, if you look on the Bytecode Alliance component doc site, right, still takes in like a string to evaluate and parse, for example. But there's a lot of inconsistencies from that around. Like for me, like as I went to the tutorial, the last slice of it is really great. The one where like the executable is found and the front slice is good too. But that middle ground of like specifically around like importing and exporting components, I'm still sort of struggling right now to sort of be like, how do I orienteer myself around it?
Yeah, I think one thing that we had off with the book for a while was that we had the calculator world, which had an adder interface, and then we had separately an add world that we were using for all the
Mm-hmm.
examples in the language guide. So before Wasamayo, we had that add world, which felt like it was actually the adder interface, but they in fact were different worlds. And that's because we just had that add world first and later added the tutorial. So that was something that Victor reconciled before Wasamayo. But I'm curious, is that what you're referencing when the wits look different? Was those two different worlds?
Well, so I think that's part of it. You know, it's part of it is sort of like what is adder as a first time reader, that threw me off a little bit. But I think for my example right now, I think if you look at at that link itself, and if you'd like, I can pull it up. But for example, the eval method itself for the calculator still expects like a string argument, whereas like the string argument as a method or a function signature isn't really present in calculator or adder currently.
So, I think Kate, maybe correct me if I'm wrong. I remember that I think the idea was that adder or like the add would be a very simple component, like a simple component to start off with, and then the calculator was supposed to be the composition. So I think this is what you were referring to before, right? Like the sort of beginning of it is just creating the first adder component, right? Just a thing that takes two unsigned integers and adds them. And then the idea was to be able to compose that into sort of more complex functionality, which is a calculator. And so that's where you get the sort of like string and like doing an eval. And then you're saying that middle part is still needs some still needs to be a little bit easier for people to do and people to sort of like grok. Is that right?
So I don't know if this was directed at Kate, but you know, I'm still clueless about, you know, WIT and WebAssembly. You know, it's still a learning process. I'm still trying to sort of ramp up as quickly as possible. But for me, a lot of the sort of learning comes from the hands-on experience, and the calculator proportion itself still sort of like I don't know what to do. Like I can read the text, right? I can read the passage, but there's no like hands-on portion, whereas there was before, right? Before I was like, oh, cool, I can do cargo component this, right? I modify the TOML file, but like the calculator example, I don't know what to do with my hands. I don't know what to type.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
I'll let you want to. Yeah.
so I'm trying to, okay, so I'm seeing a little bit. I think with the calculator example, for example, so many examples in the tutorial, it takes the style of being language agnostic, the actual tutorial. So it says, okay, now build this component. Okay, now compose it with these components. And it uses the strategy that you've looked at the language guide and gotten started with that process by building a component. Now it's that initial adder component that it teaches you. I think when you put in the pull request 3 weeks ago, it was mixed up. It was a different add component, so it wasn't helpful in that way yet. Um, so it isn't as walkthroughy because we have this polyglot ecosystem issue where we didn't want a language guide to be a tutorial. We wanted a language guide to be something that's standalone, but then we also wanted a tutorial. So it sounds like what we are hearing here is that we might want the tutorial to have a separate page for every language as well. Is that potentially what you're looking for?
I think it's more about like sort of pandering to different learning styles. You know, when I went through, Go has a great one. It's like Go by example. The Rust has the Rust book. It also has a Rust by example, and I think those two sections of it really help like the different learning styles. You know, and as an individual, you can vacillate between the two. You know, sometimes I just want to copy paste like a for loop or list comprehension from Python. Sometimes I want to look at the docs, and I think just like those two ends of the spectrum are really helpful to maintain regardless of language. And I realize that sort of like adds on the work, and this is still open source. But I I think they're both the value.
Yeah, I totally agree. We've referenced those examples of Rust by example and Go by example being really helpful. And then having separately, the other version of that, which is just using statements of definition. Um, I love the energy towards adding more examples and mimicking Go by example and Rustbook. I think we need to gather small pieces of work there, like find out what are those examples we want so that we can assign those small works pieces of work to people because things move slowly with the component book given the low resources it has. But I do think as we've had smaller pieces of work, we've been able to pick up the pace a little.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in and suggest like an idea here. Maybe it makes sense to move the calculator actually out from, like, just taking the Rust example, or the Rust guide as an example. So right now we basically walk someone through making a basic component with the adder, and then jump into sort of exporting and importing that interface, and then you pulling it into sort of a higher level component, which is the sort of calculator. That's kind of like a sort of like second step, right? It's kind of like a second project essentially, and dramatically more complicated or involved, or sort of involves more concepts than the first, and is I think a little harder to grok. If we could restructure in a way where there's some separation between these. So I don't know if that looks like adding sections under each. So right now we have like, it's like section 8, and then like let's say 8.6 is Rust, which is under 8. I don't know if it means maybe adding another sort of subheading that's consistent across all the languages, like, create an adder component, right? And then after that, use the adder component, like compose functionality of the adder component, sort of spelling out what the sort of goal is, and seeing that there's like the two steps are different, so that when someone jumps in, they can go through the first part, build the adder component, they sort of like they finish that, they sort of close that, or finish that task, and then they move on to a new task that sort of reboots the context and sort of makes it clear what we're trying to achieve, and then hopefully does that in an easy to understand way. I think that might make it a little clearer, because if I understood Mikhail right, the top part was easy to follow and kind of like easy to get through. The bottom part was easy to get through, or sort of grok, but the middle was hard. And the middle is that's the calculator bit, which is like it's the sort of second step. It's the second project that you do that sort of was, I think, intended to sort of show another level of functionality, or show another, like, a way you can sort of use what you've built from step 1. But maybe that's too much in just one document.
I don't know if I can speak in front of Danny. I think I'm gonna steal this opportunity because I know he has his hand raised. I really like that idea. I really feel like the step 2 is disjoint. I think like just splitting them out into 3 separate sections. I realized like it's maybe over indexing it, but I think like 3 separate chunks to the tutorial, and maybe that can follow for the other languages too, would be awesome. Because I think it's okay to have a thematic disjoint, but like as a reader, right, if I'm reading through a page, I expect some continuity. And it's surprising when my assumptions are challenged, when I'm just learning like the component model, it definitely threw me in for a loop.
Just some more things or I guess I definitely do think that like the composition section has historically been a thing that people find confusing, and like people want to like ask in Zulip like, hey, I don't understand why I don't understand like what to do here. And I'm like skimming it now, and I guess I'm like thinking about just a couple of things that, like, I guess one, I think it kind of like links out to like the other sections, and like kind of assumes that like you did grok the other sections, right? Like, and it's so that it almost like has the other sections as prereq, which I think is fine. But also, like, from what I recall, it's been a while since I've looked, and it's just interesting too because the calculator example like feels pedagogical, and it would be nice if there was like a way for it to feel like, I almost feel like people like feel like they understand what the book is like trying to present to them, but like that maybe the book is an oversimplified version. And so then when you like go and like try to compose things together, it can be like, oh, now I'm actually bumping into the weird things that like you encounter when you actually try to do these things out in the wild. And I guess like the other, to like bring that back to, I'm noting that like there are paths in the composition section that point to specific WIT files. And I think that like different ways that you create components can result in like having a different WIT structure. Or I think like if you do cargo component new, depending on how you do things, you might not even like have WIT. So and I also think that when you have file paths to specific WIT, and then you're referencing different sections for how to create components within different language ecosystems, you're kind of begging for it's going to be really difficult to make sure that the paths are like in sync across the different, like if any tool changes how they structure their WIT folders, then it's just going to be difficult to have a WIT path in a portion that is about things in a language agnostic way and have it like make sense to people who just came from using a tool where the WIT ended up being a different like file structure or something. So I wondered if I guess after all of that musing, what I'm trying to get to is like, it could make sense to maybe have a section on like ways to structure your WIT, and specifically like how you might want to organize your WIT if you have the intention to compose, and like maybe like kind of like, yeah, how to make decisions about where your WIT should be if you know that multiple distinct components are all going to be referencing the same WIT. Because I think that that's the thing, is different tools create the WIT in different ways. And it's kind of like if you're using cargo component, if you look at any docs about cargo components, it's always like the WIT is there from the perspective of somebody who's just authoring a component that is targeting a specific world. But like the instant you get into components sharing WIT, I think that suddenly people don't know like, oh, should this folder like is this WIT, what is the path if I'm like making a new component with another cargo component, but I wanted to like import an interface that was defined in another component's like WIT folder, you know? So anyways, I don't know if that resonates with anybody, but that's kind of some thoughts that I had sparked by what people are bringing up.
I can fill the void of silence. I mean, I fully agree. I think sort of Victor's PR about like moving around the add and adder, and like it's hard to notice that like, oh, when the directories are flipped, like where do I navigate to and what WIT files, and should they even exist at that point? You know, as a sort of a relatively new user, the directory navigation, even just the assumption, oh, I should have cloned the component docs repo and then like changed directory into this specific portion was like took me a while to figure out.
Well, so that I think is there are a couple of things here. I think having to clone the repo is probably not ideal. Just in general, like having to clone the docs repo, then go into a very specific folder. So I think that is something that probably should change just separately. And how to do that consistently and easily across different languages without like writing, you know, four or five different kinds of like template repos is another question. So that's one thing. And then to address what Danny was saying, I think there might even be another. So I'm looking on the left side at the sort of like how things are laid out, right? There's a heading for sort of understanding the component model. And this is like your usual like concept section kind of. And then there is using the component model, which jumps into examples, right? Or like sort of like how to and guides. It seems like we might get use out of a WIT section, and sort of maybe starting with like a sort of, and again, this is again sort of off on a tangent based on what Danny was saying, which was also a tangent, but we should probably be showing people a WIT first workflow, because the WIT is the most language agnostic part, right? You kind of, I guess not everyone works this way necessarily, but you think of the interface first generally when you're writing a component, right? You think of what it should do, then you sort of write a binding, right, to whichever language you're going to do or you're going to use. And so like there's a sort of step for people who are making new components that's like write WIT, run like whackage WIT fetch, to pull down all your dependencies. And that's another thing, like probably shouldn't just get explained with everything else, because it's like the Wackage sort of ecosystem or the package ecosystem is also worth explaining separately. And then you sort of pick your language that you're going to write it, sort of fulfill the world in, or write your binding in, and then you write the component, right? So we might benefit from, again, I'm not sure exactly what the structure should look like, but we might benefit from having a flow that sort of introduces the interface, introduces the, oh, I see some chat. But it introduces the interface, introduces the tooling that sort of like does WIT things and sort of fulfills, like, and then here's where we can talk about like the file structure. Like, here's what your WIT folder, like you may have a WIT folder. You probably have a WIT folder. Here's what it would look like. Here's, if there's other options, here are the other options. And then sort of like, as they move to the next section, then we introduce like, okay, now we're going to actually implement this WIT world with a given language. And then we have, the languages guides. But Kate, I see you added some Wackage docs, which is awesome.
Yeah, I think building off what you're saying, I like the WIT being the blueprint and the starting point. And I think now that Wackage has matured a lot, and it's been a long delay, but there's some docs on it in the component book. We could have a whole section that doesn't require any language tooling. We can just do, and Danny started on a section like this a while back, but essentially where you can just pull components and compose them. So we could have a calculator tutorial that requires no like building components, just composing. And then the next tutorial could be, now you can build these components in your language of choice and then compose them again. So starting people from a composed mindset using pre-built components could be an option as well.
Yeah. I think also just like I'm looking at like the tutorial right now, and I think that just even the like section that is like where you create a command component, like I think that like, or I guess it's interesting, like we're already like making an assumption that like the WIT is like defined in a specific folder, like on the user's file path, which like would be different depending on how they created their components. And then also like omits the fact that, hey, you can actually, the WIT doesn't even need to be on your machine, right? Like the WIT could be in a registry, and I can like target a component based on some WIT that is public that everybody knows about. So like, I just think that alone would like, or yeah, but I think that like something like a WIT section, I guess also there is like a WIT subsection, but yeah, I guess I don't know if you'd want maybe like in the tutorial, or like in the part that is about creating and consuming components, or in the part that is about like composing components, like being like, hey, if you know that you're going to have one component that looks like this and another component that looks like this is like how you would like define a WIT that would be shared. Or even just, I think the idea of like shared WIT could be like a thing that gets explored and like, discussed in detail.
Yeah, so like with that WIT section you're looking at, that's like the concept section. So like that's what I saw too. And it's like, it's that section's kind of like just general concepts, and then the next section's kind of like jumping into building, essentially, right? Like using the component model. In my mind, and this is just my opinion, but it's like, I think of it like, write a WIT, but do it like very simply, right? Introduce just a tiny bit of the WIT, like Wackage tooling, then build a component, right? Like that is the simplest it can get. I think for just like a new component is like, you write a very simple WIT, you run like one Wackage command, which you may not understand, but it kind of does the right thing because we've given you a simple thing. And then, we sort of like have a little bit of description, but not too much. And then you sort of branch off into whichever languages to write the actual binding, and then you have a component. Now, I think so basically WIT, build a component, then compose, because I think once you have a component, you sort of, and we show you how you can do something with it, right? We show you how you can run it in the host, right? That's also included. So you have a component, you can do something with it. That's like step one. Like that's like, hello world. And then it's like, oh, you can also compose, you can do more complex things. And I think from there you can kind of do more you can add more complexity and then explain more of the tooling, right? Like take it, like visit whackage again and be like, hey, you can actually override where you get the components from, or like this is how you would use multiple widths in a folder. But again, I don't know how like if that's a reasonable way to go. It's not clear to me how to change the current like organization structure on the left side to make this reasonable, because there's like one of the steps will just have 8 subs, or not 8, 6 substeps, which is just different languages. But we like the simplest way is clear, or in my mind, is like width, like little bit of width, little bit of like whackage just to pull things down. Write your bindings, run, or write your component, run your component. That's like that's the smallest, I think, and simplest way we could introduce someone to like writing a component, I think.
Yeah, I really like that flow. Just want to agree. That sounds very accessible, very hands-on, and I think we should prioritize that probably over trying to fit things into existing like navigational paradigms. Like if we need to revamp the navigation to make that something that's possible, I think that's worth it.
And to be fair, it's what we have now. Like this is basically what we have now. Like we just go like straight into it with just language support for components is just straight into building the adder.
I just want to mention, just like in terms of like selfishly what I care about, and I think every sort of said that at the beginning of the call. I just want my handheld, throughout the whole thing. Like if whatever the structure is, like I as a reader sort of hope that the author, writing this, or the amalgam of authors, right, this like sort of gestalt, is like assuming I'm an idiot, right? I'm hoping, I'm sort of assuming I'm an idiot isn't jumping through this, and I think really nice tutorials sort of like allow you to go in blind to something and sort of get an emotional reaction out of yourself. And when I'm emotional, I mean like, oh, this feels good. I actually created something of value. I wonder if I can extrapolate what I've learned from this tutorial and actually produce something, unguided. And I think that the hand holding part is like really important. If you can thread, your stream of consciousness as the reader, or sort of as the tutorial taker, there's a lot of value gained, but there's also a lot of value lost when that thread is broken at some point, and you have to sort of like find it again. And this may sort of go counter current to sort of the agnostic approach of wit, and it's okay, I think, to start with like one language and to not worry about sort of backporting it or side streaming it to another language, but just like find one language where like I can follow along consistently, and if it means sort of changing directories or cloning something, that's fine, as long as the steps are laid out explicitly. It's not the best approach, but like whatever it is, it's a compromise where I think prioritizing sort of not losing that thread is really valuable to the reader, because throwing someone off, like to me, I was honestly intimidated by the documentation, because I was like, oh, like what's going on here? Am I just too dumb to get it? I'm like, oh no, things are constantly changing, and people just like didn't notice that this part wasn't updated.
Do we feel like we have some issues laid out here? I think the flow that you synthesized, Victor, I think in my head, I'm not fully clear on it yet, because it sounds like the flow we have in every language guide, but it sounds like you're trying to have it be an outer flow. Um, the flow of wit first, bindings, build, run is the flow of every language guide. So I'm trying to understand what that looks like at a larger sense, but maybe we can define that in an issue. And yeah, define that an issue. Another issue, it sounds like, is for the tutorial, find a way to have it be more hands-on, and less abstract. And then also another issue is let's use whackage so that they don't actually have to build anything at some point. But other pieces that have come out in the conversation that we can pull out as well. The other thing that I want to mention is Yash has been doing work to create examples as BA projects. So there's a WASI HTTP example repo that he put in under Bytecode Alliance. And that can be one that we can point to for a really good serve example. And so that's one that I've been wanting to add as like a secondary tutorial. And I like that the actual example is owned by a separate project and will keep being updated separately. And his goal is to create like a different one for different languages. So that kind of goes along with the comment earlier of like moving calculator to its own project as well. But yeah, collecting these items would be good, and assigning people to them. I think in our every docs meeting, we can make sure that things are assigned and moving forward.
Could maybe those could be the template projects that Yash is working on? Like, cause you can make a repo, like a template repo in GitHub. So maybe that could be a solution for the sort of like not having people clone the docs repo and then go into a subdirectory. Yeah, it sounds like we should just have issues for this though. Okay, so I'll take I'll make an issue for the sort of or just try to get my ideas on I guess on paper with regards to the sort of like first flow or how I see it being different from what we have already, and then we can discuss it there. So that's one thing at the very least. Let me just write that down. And then the other thing that came up was like so I guess we should probably make an issue for to coordinate with Yash if he's making template repos to make them like if he wants to do that, or if we can avoid people having to clone the docs repo to try an example or to see the code for an example.
For that work, is that he's making template repos for specific things? Will you fill me in on that a little bit more?
Oh, yeah. So if he's making, I took it to mean that he was making like example projects, right? For given languages.
Yeah, right now it's just WASI HTTP examples, and it's just Rust, and it's
okay.
not a template repo. It's a repo with a walkthrough of it exactly.
Just in terms of like reducing the amount of effort, is it okay to just have one template repo and just like have that repo just basically support other languages? Like it's okay if you clone in excess, right? Like nobody's gonna care if there's like some Ruby or Python code and I'm following along like the Rust path, right?
Yeah, that's so I broadly agree with that. But the thing is, we also have that now, right? Like as the docs repo, because someone can clone the docs repo. But I think an issue where we discuss all of this and figure out a way to template with like maybe we use some sort of tool, like if there's some sort of easy tool we can use to just pull a folder from a repo into onto someone's system or something like that. But yeah, I think it's worth.
But so the issue, I mean, I would counter that point, Victor, and say like the issue now is the navigational depth of the repo, right? If there was a new repo that had a lot of languages and was relatively flat, in other words, you only had to change directory once into your language, that would solve a lot of it. Because like for me, like Git cloning it is fine, and all of a sudden now there's two halves, right? There's like the component docs, there's this other part of the component model specification, go into the docs, there's an example portion, and then there's a tutorial portion. What does it mean? Aren't they both a tutorial? Then I go into the tutorial, right? And there's a wit and an adder. I think just flattening that all into a separate repo would do a lot of good.
I'm gonna suggest a thing too, which I Victor, you could incorporate this into one of the issues you're making, or if you feel like it deserves its own home, I can create an issue. But like, I'm also like using like importing a component like should be simpler than like having to clone a template or like interact with the template at all. Like I guess it would be nice if yeah, and I guess like also Kate with like talking about like leaning into whackage like a little bit more. Like if we decided somewhere on like GHCR or like that there is like a GHCR project where like hey like there is an adder component like already on like in GHCR, and so like when you're doing like you're using whackage commands to basically just like have it and not have to clone anything or build anything else. There is just some useful component out there, and I'm just like using it easily, and I'm not navigating any file structure in order to understand where. Like I don't want to know how it works. I just want it to work, and I think that that would also potentially help people feel like, oh, now I feel empowered to create a component that somebody else would just bring in, which will make me feel that my component is actually like useful, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I think I empower you to quickly just put up an issue that says, let's push the adder component up to Bytecode Alliance's GHCR. So Yash's example pushed the Hello Wazi HTTP up to GHCR. So it has that component to it. So there's already a precedent of pushing those examples up. So let's just put that in issue. Let's push it up. Let's have that available. And that can be a quick PR that's added regardless of this whole restructuring. So one issue is push that component up. The other issue is pull it into the tutorial as like a step over instead of a build. So does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, I think so. And then also it could be cool too is actually if like hello WASI HTTP. I mean, I think that that's supposed to be like a very simple example of just like how to have a component that you can like serve as like something that responds to HTTP requests. But it would also be pretty cool to have something like a WASI HTTP that is also just like, hey, I'm importing another component. And like the way that I'm turning requests into responses is via some operation that I got from a dependency. I think that that would be pretty cool as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Danny, did you want to put those issues up or do you want me to do that?
I can I can do an issue. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to take it on myself to simplify the calculator tutorial as it is. It has one extra step than it needs. So um, instead, just change the WIT world to Abwazi CLI run in it itself instead of doing this weird limbo of creating another command component. So I'll do that to remove one more step from it.
This is a little off topic, but one of the things that I really wanted in the tutorial was syntax highlighting. And I think I may have shown this to Danny and possibly Victor, but I posted in the chat. So this is like a fork I had of the component docs, and it's a section of it in the Zoom chat that sort of has the full syntax highlighting. One of the things I was working on during WASI.io and previously is tree sitter grammar for WIT. So the upstream guy has been like ignoring me for a while. So I've been I talked it over with Oscar for a bit. And I was like, should I just hard fork it? Like what should I do here? Because he's been like sort of slow to respond, like every 2 weeks or so he's been responding. But sort of like one of the things I did was like I supported sort of recursive comment blocks. I supported the sense, the feature gates, sense deprecated, etc. But I haven't sort of posted a PR yet for this. So this uses a project called mdbook-treesitter for the syntax highlighting, right? So it takes in a grammar and it basically finds code blocks in the markdown that are like WIT grammar or whatever grammar you have and does the syntax highlighting for you. However, one of the problems with it, and so I was a contributor to that, I found this project. I was like, oh, this is really cool. I want syntax highlighting in the WIT tutorial, is that it produces dilibs as an output artifact. And I think I would be much more comfortable in like, you would have to get them from somewhere during the CI process. I'd be much more comfortable generating WASM grammar blocks, but that just takes a bit of that takes like adding mscript and support to the mdebug tree setter. So I was just curious, like, should I create an issue ahead of time to discuss this? I mean, I think like pretty syntax highlighting is like a straight up value add to it. Like, what will be the process for saying, hey, like, I want to introduce this dependency?
I would start with an issue, just to, that way the what is trying to be fixed is in an issue format and then can be moved to a PR.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah,
yeah.
because I realized I just like dumped a bunch of stuff on you guys. And I was like, hey, how do I go about like getting some buy-in for this?
And for context, someone who's really deliberative and kind of good at asking like all the questions to figure out what, why, where is Ivan, who you've probably interact with the component box, and he's in New Zealand. So he's in a completely different time zone, so can't hop on these, but issues are great for him to kind of narrow scope with his amazing async communication skills because he's on an island across the world.
You
So
guys,
that's helpful.
apologies for interrupting, Kate. You guys don't use discussions at all in the component docs, do you? It's mainly issues.
No, I
Sounds good.
think issues is
Perfect.
I've actually never worked on a project that's used discussion, so it's not like a something that I'm as used to using, but if other folks find it useful, we could try to bring that.
I've seen
I don't-
people aspire to use discussions, but they always it's just like issues is just
yeah, it needs a lot of moderation. And Nginx we had I think unit used discussions, and it needs a lot of proactive moderation. Otherwise it's kind of useless. But then it's a great way to collaborate. In fact, yeah. You can check out the GitHub repository for Nginx Unicate. That should still have, let me check, discussions enabled. Yep. Still there.
Do you mind linking that in the Zoom chat?
I will. It has literally nothing to do with the component docs, but it's a so here. Well, they're actually pretty actively using it. Yeah, last week, 3 days ago, last week, yesterday. So yeah, we have created the discussions to like move the Q&A discussions and questions part out of the issue section into a like separate section of the repository where you can actively discuss ideas, share opinions. Yeah, but it took us some time to guide the users into a state where they understand that for specific questions that it's better to open up a discussion thread instead of creating an issue. That's why you need a lot of moderation. Otherwise you will have this wildness of somebody is creating an issue, the other one is creating a GitHub discussion, and then you need a moderator saying, hey, that's not an issue. I have moved your issue into a discussion. So please go and document and ask other questions in this discussion thread. But beside of this, it's a great tool for collaboration.
One thing also that would be great to I think do is clean up maybe some of the pull requests and like just sort of super old pull requests that are kind of sort of unlikely to be able to be like, rebased and get back up to the current code. And also I think there are a few old issues as well that are like, I think there's like an issue from like about the tutorial not working from like Wasm time 20.x, right? Like some version Wasm time 20, and it's just like that is, it's probably, I think it's probably fine to sort of close that and reopen if it's still an issue, rather than sort of leaving it around, if that makes sense. Maybe I'll go through and sort of, I don't know, ping on ones that I think could be sort of just closed, because they're, I mean, if you just go back from basically just go to the oldest issues, I think a lot of the stuff on just the second page is too old to be relevant.
Victor, I think that would be a good thing to do at the end of these meetings. Just basically a triage. So we can go in and look at all those PRs and all those issues when we have a bunch of people here and just all say closed, done, fixed, prioritize.
Wasn't it UK that created a project board for the documentation SIG so that we can actually put these issues into the right lanes and say, hey, we can move this to the icebox, or I think it's called backlog. And this can be closed and this can be worked on. And I think you have created the
Yeah, and I
project
think
board.
for this, we don't even need to use the project board for the PR one. We can just go
Yeah.
to PR1 and stuff like that. I'm happy to, we could jump in that now for the last 10 minutes if we want to do that, but I want to make sure we're first covering all the other topics of improvement for the docs. Cool. In that case, do we want to give that a try? At least start with the pull request because there's only a few, and then go from there.
Yeah, it
Great.
sounds good.
And share my screen for that. Okay. So let's go back to September of 8th. So this is very old. And I don't even know if this doc exists. This came from an issue where someone wanted to know what does an interface mean with regards to a package, which means with regards to a component. Like, how do all these terms relate to each other? And I just want to see if we even, yeah, so it was like we have all these sections, but how do they all relate to each other? So it was adding another document here that basically summarized this is how they all relate to each other. Is that something that we still find would be useful?
Wouldn't that, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry.
I mean, isn't that a good candidate for the intro? What is it called in introduction in the component model? Was there paragraph 1 of the docs book, I think? Yeah, either
Sure.
introduction, maybe there, like having a TLDR thing saying, hey, that is the status contribution, and then this is all the different pieces we have in the component model, and then you can, it's to me, the paragraph 1 is kind of the homepage. So you can open up this one and then you can click on the specific things you would like to, to read about, either in the home section here on the homepage or in the main navigation on the left. So for me, it would rather fit in the introduction page than in a separate, I don't know, introduction of what are the terms page. But that's just my point of view here.
I think what I'm hearing there is this could be almost a navigating this guide section.
Yeah, with some extra explanation to tell the person who's reading it where to click next. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with the idea that it can go on an existing page. Like I agree that introduction is probably a reasonable place to put it. If it seemed reasonably succinct there, but basically if it's succinct enough and it sort of like motivates all the concepts together, right? Because we right now on the homepage, I don't think we need home as a huge heading, but on that page we sort of have a line about the component model, but I think right under that line that those paragraphs might be good, right? Like that might be a perfect place for it, rather than in another page, just to sort of like lay out the concepts really, really briefly, and then have more concepts that people can link to and look up.
What's the name of that page? Introduction. Okay. I got 5 more minutes. Let's do a couple more.
Yeah.
Okay,
on,
so
on
this
this
was
one,
an
I tried.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Victor. Please.
Sorry, I tried to get in touch with Ritesh actually on this one. But yeah, I think this one is just, it's so old that I don't think it like they're just trying to get it up to trying to get it rebased is just probably not going to be reasonable. I don't think.
Yeah, I think this was okay. I'm just gonna close this.
Like, also the guides have changed obviously dramatically since this was there. So like if it's still an issue, we can obviously reopen and re-explore, like maybe make a new issue and then someone else can pick it up. But
Okay. Already done that.
I wanted to, can I bring up a non sequitur that I think is worthwhile really quick? Just with respect to having a section in where we're like pulling in a pre-made component in like the tutorial for composition. I think that WAC still can't use GHCR because I think that WAC is still using warg rather than WASM package tools. So I think that like maybe I'll call that out in the issue, but I think that it might somebody needs to update WAC to use WASM package tools, which it doesn't do.
I think that shouldn't be blocking for us. You can still whackage fetch the component and then do a whack plug.
I don't think you can do a WAC plug. I mean, I guess you could do WAC plug with components on the file system. But
Yeah, that's what I mean. You do a whackage fetch. So now you
Yeah.
have the adder.wasm and then you do a whack plug.
Okay, cool.
Victor, can we close this? Because it sounds like you
Yeah,
pulled these
I
changes
think
into your
so.
other peer. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you mind? Oh, yeah, okay. Okay. All right. I think we made it through the what do we I am not up to date on this. What do we want to do about this one as it stands, Mikhail?
I'm gonna I have the stuff to address Victor, so there's a lot of changes I need to do that I was just lazy and or tired. But I should address most of Victor's stuff, so it's just a bunch of just iterating upon it, you know. I have a PR in draft. I'm gonna revert some of the stuff that Victor said about the console and the code comments. But I think it's just gonna be a bit of back and forth until we're both happy, basically. It's like I'm totally expecting a lot of pushback. Like I said, a lot of these changes are speculative, and I sort of even mentioned to Victor, like for example, like the Rust book uses like the imperative mood for some stuff. There's a lot of tenses, there's a lot of rewording. This is the stuff I did, but basically, like as long as I address everything Victor's happy with, Kate, I can like sort of ping you on the PR, and if there's anything like you're not happy with, I'm gonna address that, etc. I just haven't done it.
Yeah, and I definitely feel like I had no other sort of like notes. I left a bunch of like sort of like nitty sort of comments, so I feel like
Yeah, it's
sort of pick them and leave them. Some of the larger stuff, I was also sort of like pretty happy with like making an issue to talk about it if we were wanting to go a different way as well, which is I'm also very very happy with it. But like some of the changes I really want to get in, like the using the includes. Because I think then like I personally spent a lot of time just copying code over, and I feel like
exactly
we can avoid that forever.
I'll get to that honestly as soon as this meeting's over. I've just been procrastinating for a myriad of reasons, but yeah, like I said, I'm happy to fold on just about any position I have, just to get it in and sort of defer any dogma I have until afterwards. Kate, it's on me, and I apologize for not getting to it sooner.
No, that's totally fine. I'm not fast on my turnaround necessarily either. Okay, that sounds good. Also, Victor, I think we should start a discussion about how we make you a maintainer of the docs. So like in a scenario like this, I wouldn't need to be folded in at all. So if you'd be open to that, but that's up to you.
I mean, yeah, I'd be open to that. On some of those, I really did want a third opinion, I thought it would be great because I feel like a lot of time. Well, I don't know. Just getting into the weeds, like a lot of times people just use like the bash one for everything, and I don't know. I don't know if I'm just focusing too much on something that doesn't matter, or like if people actually do prefer the other like syntax highlighting. But yeah, being able to sort of I guess review make a review that means anything would be nice, I guess.
That's on console versus SH.
Yeah, Yeah, because
Okay,
like
so
shell is a shell and bash is a shell and console is the
So-
thing for putting into consoles, right?
the way we have it that we do it internally at Fermion that people are very opinionated about is, so I have formed opinions as well about it, is SH is if there's no output, it's literally just commands. Console is if you see output and you must put the $ at the front of every command. So it's $ command, output comes after, no $signs. $ command, output comes after, that's console. So console is an interaction. You're seeing the input and the output. Bash is everything else.
That's great. I just like seeing pretty colors, which is why I did it.
Yeah. I mean, so like I am happy to like let us make that the thing. And I don't know where to write this, or maybe if it's like in a contributing doc. But you know what? I'll make an issue for that, and then that's it. Like that was the thing I like tagged you on, because I was like, I don't know, we just need a stance, and I don't want to be the person that decides, or that like it shouldn't just be my opinion, right? So I'm happy with that stance. So as long as we have some.
It just to touch on the output, so in the PR that I have out, one of the sort of alternatives, and I'm not advocating for getting it, but one of the alternatives to sort of MDBook alerts, which is used by, I think, TreeSetter, it has like a separate portion for the output that's like automatically minimized. Now, I really like that in TreeSetter. It's in one of the comments. Let me see if it's like in one of the resolved ones. But it would be great if that was like upstreamed. I think Victor and I discussed it. I don't remember what it was called. It's slipping my mind. But when I was going through the TreeSetter docs, I was like, this is really nice. But if at any point in time, like those could be split apart to where the output, because I think there's like, to me, there's a bit of friction as a reader, and it's not that important, but like to split out the output of the console from what you put in would be like a really nice value add. Of course, that's like long term and require like changes upstream in MDBook alerts.
I was going to add, just on your last point, like splitting up, I think that's something we do sort of inconsistently around the docs, is like showing what you ran and what you should get separately. I think is usually a bit more useful. But anyway, that's like we're almost we're past time, so I'm gonna
This has been a very productive meeting. Thank you everyone for coming. Please put up those issues you filed. Also, Eric pushed up the notes. Feel free to write comments on that PR if you want different sections of the conversation added. Since he hopped off early, I'll probably add some just retroactive notes. And I'll see folks in a couple weeks if you're able to attend. We also have the documentation channel on Zulip. We want to have some sort of asynchronous discussion there as well. So yeah. Great. I'll see you all next time.
See you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.